What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? Boogie2988 coming at you live once again through the power of the internet, and I promised you guys a review of it. The problem is, there was no Thursday showing at any of our local theaters, so we went to try to see it on Friday, and even though they added 3 extra shows on Friday, they all sold out. So my earliest chance to get it to see was tonight, here Sunday night. This will probably be going up on Monday morning, but I finally got to see it, and I promised you guys a review, and I wanted to go ahead and deliver that review. Now, I'm going to do the first half here relatively spoiler-free, and I'll let you know when we get to the spoiler section. I will move Pennywise's scary face over to this side of the screen before we start talking about any spoilers. That way you'll know, if you skip around in the video, whether or not we get into any spoilers. Now, I know I must be the last YouTuber to upload a review of this movie, and I'm sure a lot of people have already seen it, because it seems like they really worked with YouTubers on this. A lot of YouTubers got an invite out to see the film, and I know a few people that got paid to help advertise this film. Just to be very clear, I did not get paid anything. I didn't even get free tickets. I didn't get invited to a premiere. I'm just a huge Stephen King fan. A lot of people have asked me, Boogie, where's your Dark Tower review? And the answer is that movie came out the weekend after my gastric bypass surgery. I was too sick to go, and once the reviews came in, I thought I would just wait. So I don't know if that review will ever come out. A lot of people will say, Boogie, you only ever post movie reviews for movies you enjoyed, and I think this is probably going to keep that string going, though I think I'll eventually crap all over the Dark Tower. That said, let's talk about this particular movie. When the original screenshot, or the original promotional still of Pennywise came out, I was immediately disappointed. I don't know if you go back and you check my Twitter, I know a lot of people were. They said the clown doesn't look anything like what I imagined he would look like. He just looks creepy. The costume just looks silly. The old-timiness of it just doesn't make any sense. And I think I was in that boat, but willing to give it a shot. And I'm really glad that I was. Because it turns out the clown really, really fit the feel. And maybe this is even more similar to what Stephen King's imagining of the clown might have been. It's been a long, long time since I read that book. I read that book, I think, in '89, all 1,000 pages of it, which is a very instrumental book for me growing up. All of Stephen King's books that he wrote, pretty much from the beginning right up into the '90s, I read every single one of them as soon as they came out. It was the first adult book I ever read. I read The Shining as the very first adult book that we ever read. My wife just read that for her book club. So when I say I'm a Stephen King fan, I'm a huge Stephen King fan. So this adaptation is pretty amazing. It really is. If you're a fan of the source material, I think you will enjoy this. Obviously, with the runtime they have, they certainly cannot put in everything. They do a good job of making sure that there's, a little bit of development for, the creature and for each individual kid and each individual situation. They make sure to tell a very cohesive and interesting story. The special effects are not always perfect. Sometimes they're a little cheesy. I mean, it's not like the CGI is ever bad or anything like that. It's all very good looking, and it doesn't really throw you out of the moment. Sometimes it's a little cheesy to me. But overall, I really think this is a movie a lot of people should see. And if you're the kind of person who says, I don't watch scary movies. I hate scary movies. I like scary books. I hate scary movies. They get my heart racing. I feel uncomfortable. A lot of bad things have happened to me in my lifetime. And so I don't like to see that stuff on the screen. It makes, I'm scared for weeks and days after I see a movie like The Ring that just stays with me. So I generally do not like them. But this feels a lot more like Stranger Things than it does like a traditional scary movie or a gross out movie. Or I really think the big difference here is that scary is scary movies. I don't like scary movies, but I like horror. I like terror. I like when it's believable and it's drawn out and it's just awful. I like psychological thrillers a lot more than I like, the scary monster, the Bye-Bye Man or the Goo Goo Doll or whatever stupid iteration, Paranormal Activities I never saw, but it just did not appeal to me. So I think if you're the kind of person who enjoyed Stranger Things, I think you're absolutely going to enjoy this. It's very similar in the veins of that show. So overall, acting is fantastic. The kids did a perfect performance. The writing was very, very good for the rewrite. I have a few opinions about the ending and a few opinions about some of the smaller details, the things that they chose to change, the things that they chose to include, and you can see that in the spoiler section. But none of it's enough to throw even a classic Stephen King fan like me out of the loop. And in fact, to be honest with you, there were moments where my wife was literally hiding her eyes, crying, and I was grinning ear to ear because it was so picture perfect to my memory and my imagination of those original moments. Still to this day, I will say that the clown's face, and even more importantly, I think the clown's voice, was still uncomfortable for me, but not as uncomfortable as some of the stuff in the book may be, which was, we'll talk about that in the spoiler section as well. I think if you look at this face right now and you can find it at all remotely creepy or scary, you're going to be fine. If for some reason you just laugh at that face, I say still walk into the theater and see it at some point, at least in a home video or something to that effect, because I think you'll be fairly surprised. That said, should you see the movie? I think so. If you're a Stephen King fan, absolutely. If you do like not run-of-the-mill scary movies, I think this is pretty amazing. And if you love Stranger Things, I think you owe it to yourself to see this film because it's a very similar vein and captures a lot of that magic. That said, watch Stranger Things if you haven't seen that. All right, here we go. So spoiler time, spoiler time, spoiler time, spoiler time. So just let me go ahead and say, before we even get started here, I am not a huge fan of the original miniseries. I liked the first half of the original miniseries with the kids. I hated the second half. I felt it was just bad. And it was sucked because it had some of my favorite actors, John Ritter and Harry from Night Court and stuff like that. And it was just bad. The second half of it was just bad. First half was pretty fantastic, though. And I'm really glad that they've decided to separate this out into two movies. I guess at least two movies, but it should only be two movies. But the first movie being exclusively the kids. And I think there's just too much story to tell, especially when your source material is 1,000 pages. A lot of the stuff that they chose to go deep on, I was really pleased with. I was really pleased to see the hypochondriac kid get his story arc with his mother. Obviously, I was a victim of Munchausen syndrome as a kid, and that in reading that in the books was one of the very first times I ever realized that about myself, though I didn't know what Munchausen syndrome was. But realizing that mom was pretending the kid was sicker than he actually was, I realized that my mom was doing that to me. So that was a pivotal part of the book. I was so glad I was in there. The part about Beverly and her lecherous father, her rapist father, I was so stoked to see that they put that in the film because, again, that is something I can relate to and something I absolutely loved in the film. And but so many of the details of the stuff that they changed seem to be changed for the better. For example, Beverly's scene in the bathroom. I think in the miniseries, a balloon comes out of there. I think in the book, maybe a balloon comes out of there as well. But of course, in this, there's just the hair and that ties her down and the voices. And that scene alone from it scared me for a long time. I was uncomfortable alone. Between that and room 217 in The Shining, I will tell you, I was uncomfortable in bathrooms to this day. I still make sure that the shower curtain is drawn open. That's how Stephen King's books affected me. So I certainly was going into this very hopeful, and it delivered in almost every way. So some of the big changes they made, obviously the original book takes place in the 1950s. And the focus there was on the 1950s movies monsters, the creature from the Black Lagoon and the werewolf and the mummy and stuff like that. They updated this to the 1980s. And part of me going in was terrified that they would do like movie monsters from the 1980s. So I was afraid I was going to see Jason. I was afraid I was going to see Freddy Krueger. I was afraid I was going to see all that. And that really would not have been pleasing to me. But instead, they did the point of the books, which was to choose a child and choose something that specifically would terrorize that child or be one of their inner fears. And they did that here with this film, each person having their own individual fears. Mike obviously being afraid of his parents when they got burnt to death. And Richie being afraid of clowns was a little weird, but not too on the nose. I guess that was fine. The heavy set kid, of course, which reminds me, this is something I want to talk about. So having been a victim of bullying growing up, and probably even in my later years being a bit of a bully myself, I would say that Stephen King does a wonderful job of nailing bullying and what it's like to be bullied to a very strong degree. And the Bauer kid, of course, if you're familiar with the Stephen King world, you know that Bauer is very, very important in the rest of it and in other places as well. They did such a good job of showing just the nightmare of what it's like to be bullied. And one of the scenes that reminds me of it was one of the kids that gets like gravel shoved in his mouth and in his gums and stuff. And of course, when they carve up the fat kid and actually cut his stomach, I can't believe that actually made the film. I can't believe that made the film. And that's what made this feel so loving and kind to the source material. It was just really beautiful. Like, you can clearly tell the people who wrote the script, the people who filmed it, the people who were on set, costume design. There were so many little Easter eggs, so many little things that give nods to the Dark Tower universe, to the Stephen King universe, to the old source material, to the original books, to the miniseries. It's a work of art. It really is a work of art. I would have to say easily, probably my second favorite Stephen King adaptation to date. The first of which I think stands to reason is Misery. Misery has very few changes to it. The hobbling scene is different if you're familiar with that movie. But Kathy Bates just does a wonderful job. The film is fantastic. The ending is weird as well. And I think that's the other thing I really want to talk about this movie is the change to the ending. So I know it's super controversial. It didn't even really stand out to me when I read it in 1989. How weird it is that the scene in the book, which is obviously not in the film. Major spoiler if you've not read the book. There's the scene with the kids running a train on Beverly, and the reasoning behind it made a lot of sense to me as a kid. Obviously they need to become adults to escape Pennywise's little in-between realm, and so they lose their adulthood, or they lose their childhood by having sex with Beverly, which is really weird, and obviously not something I think you can put in a film, especially with as nervous and weird, just weird that is. So they had to come up with a little something. And I did like this ending quite a bit. I do feel like Pennywise kind of got defeated without getting fully defeated. I do miss the scene with the inhaler. This is battery acid, you fuck. Which I think, but again, that just beating Pennywise to death and everybody having a role and everybody playing a part and Richie's little speech in the end, I think it was a great rewrite to the ending. And that's something you always have to do. Whenever you bring Stephen King to the screen or to a television set, or even really just read the books to your kids or your friends, you have to rewrite the ending, because that guy he's a wonderful author. He's just not very good at ending things. I like the way he ended The Dark Tower, but everything else. And it certainly ends especially weird. And I think probably they did themselves a great service by ignoring the mysticism that is written in this book. Because I believe it was Red Letter Media who said that this book, the source material of it, was co-written by cocaine. And I think Stephen King has admitted that quite a bit as well. And so when it talks about the mysticism stuff of the universe, that our world was vomited out by a giant space turtle, and the space turtle carries on. See the turtle of enormous girth on his back. He holds the earth. He's slow but always kind. He holds his all within his mind. That stuff is crazy, and you can't put that in a movie. I would have loved it if they put it in the movie, but my wife would have been like, what the hell? And then if the fact that, it is the cosmic opposite of the turtle that creates us and holds us all in his mind. Obviously, they can't put that in the stuff in the movie, but they did put a lot of nods to that. If you look at the big scene towards the end when Beverly stares into Pennywise's mouth, you see the deadlights, which is just a weird phrase, but I mean, it's very important in the Stephen King universe if you're familiar with it at all. But at least there was the nod there for that. There was all the little nods to turtles. They find a turtle in the lake, and when he goes to Georgie's room, there's a turtle made out of Legos. Just all these little nods, and just so I can't wait to look at the movie a second time to look for more of these Easter eggs. So, without a doubt, as a Stephen King fan, I was very, very pleased. Still to this day, I don't know how I feel about that version of Pennywise. The face paint's great. The eyes are great. The balding head is weird. The costume was weird. And the voice was weird. But that's okay, because he wasn't supposed to be likable. He wasn't supposed to be lovable. And obviously trying to just recreate Tim Curry's portrayal would have been impossible anyway. Let's just be honest with you. That's the only really good thing, in my opinion, about the original run, the original miniseries. And I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I loved it. Tim Curry, I loved. The rest of it I did not love. But Tim Curry, I love him. But you couldn't try to redo that here. So again, I hope that you did enjoy this movie. Let me know if you think I'm wrong as a Stephen King fan. Are you a Stephen King fan? If you are, let me know if I got the details right of what you thought was good and what was bad. If I was wrong here, please let me know. But overall, this is just a fantastic, well-crafted movie, well-acted, well-written, great soundtrack. one of the best movies I've seen all year, one of the best movies I've seen in a lifetime. Genuinely, my second favorite Stephen King adaptation to date. So, wonderful job. Wonderful job. Hope you guys choose to see it at some point. Guys, thanks for watching. I love you very much. I'll speak with you again soon.